Welcome to the Speak Like a Leader podcast with John Bates. Welcome to the show. With me today is someone who very directly, over quite a while, dramatically impacted my understanding and approach to leadership. He's somebody who has become a really dear, dear friend of mine. He is someone who many people know as Whiskey Jesus. And he is someone who I think is on the cutting edge of a whole new market and segment of the entertainment market. And his name's Jim McCarthy. He's the CEO and co-founder of Goldstar.com. And he was my boss for a long time. And I will say that working with Goldstar.com taught me some of the most important lessons that I've ever learned in my life. And I think we'll get to those things. But if you want to find Jim, you can find him at jimmccarthy.info, jimmccarthy.info. You can find Goldstar at goldstar.com. That's half price tickets to live events, early previews to live events. Of course, that whole thing got a little bit whacked during the pandemic, but that's starting to come back. And then out of that, Jim is on the cutting edge with Stellar Tickets. And I'm going to let him tell you the URLs for those. I think it's workwithstellar.com.
If you're on the if you're a live entertainment creator and you want to do online digital live entertainment or online events, go to workwithstellar.com. That explains it a little bit better than the other side, which is stellartickets.com, which you should go to if you're just looking for a show to watch online. So
yeah,
those are workwithstellar.com and stellartickets.com.
Awesome. And, you know, this is not just watching something online like maybe you used to think it would be like, or like you used to experience, or like I used to experience. This is people who are starting to really, really think hard about the online entertainment experience. And so I think Jim is working, I think you're working with some really cutting edge entertainment producers that are pioneering something new and really exciting. Is that accurate? Yeah.
Yeah. It's something that's hard to talk about because we're at the beginning of a new thing.
Yeah.
And you've been around long enough to know that by definition, when you're at the beginning of a new thing, you don't know what's coming.
Yeah.
Because if you
think of the internet, right?
The internet, yeah, it's a great example. In 1995 or 6 or whenever you want to pick, it was quite obvious that the freight train of innovation and the development of the internet was on its way.
Yeah,
you could stand on the tracks and hear it, but you didn't know what was going to be there. You couldn't say, well, by 2000 we'll have this, right? So by definition, when you're at the beginning of something new, you don't know what's coming next. You can have some ideas, and you could probably kind of get your mind around what's going to be different a little bit, but you don't know. So it's really, I guess the way that I would talk about it is this: what is the most exciting thing that people watch, right? Things that people get most excited about watching are things that are kind of appointment viewing in one way or another, right?
Yeah, they happen in a real time.
In real time, whether that be, a sports event, Super Bowl, or pay-per-view boxing match, if you're a fan of that, or the last episode of a season of a certain show, just anything really where you got to be there when it happens. I think that what we're going to see is over the next, say, 5 years is a real revolution in people's ability to deliver that to you, live entertainment creators.
Yeah.
Ability to deliver that to you and innovation in what that is in a way that doesn't exactly look like what you're seeing today. It's not just a show that you would normally see in person with the camera on it. It's more. It's more participation, more access, more community, all that stuff. And so we're the pandemic made the opportunity happen, but we're just at the Kitty Hawk, the early stages of this thing where a lot more is to come.
Right. Well, and the thing that keeps going through my mind, and it's maybe already trite at this point to talk about Citizen Kane, but movies like, you had talking pictures was a big deal. Like it used to be that you would have like somebody playing live piano to the video of the movie, and that was the movies, right? And then all of a sudden, people would hold up cue cards and you could read what the person just said. And then, that evolved into something where you actually had a movie like we know it today.
Yeah.
And that's just kept getting better and better at something like that.
No doubt. I mean, the other comparison that's even more recent is the mobile internet. So for those of you who weren't
I worked with you, Jim, when that was happening. And I will admit that even though I had been on the cutting edge of all kinds of technology stuff, I was resisting like responsive websites and stuff. I'm like, dude, I don't want to do that on my phone. Just like, I want to do it. But everybody else wanted to do it on their phone. And now the experience is so much better.
Yeah. And a lot of things that aren't, it's always that urge to take the thing that's there and put it in the new format.
Yeah.
So in that case, it was take your website and jam it into a phone. Right.
Yeah. That's why I didn't like it. Yeah.
And then what happened was, okay, that's first. And then that kind of was all right. And then not great, but it was all right. And then somebody said, well, look, I'm not going to take an existing website designed to be on a computer screen and jam it into a phone. I'm going to start with the phone. Imagine the blank screen of a phone and build from the ground up, for this thing. And that's where you get things like Uber, right? In 2009. Relatively early in the mobile, the mobilization of the internet, right? Where that was never a website that got turned into an app. It was built from the ground up to function on the screen that it was meant for, and that's where we are with it. That's how everything goes, right? I mean, you can look back to the early days of television, where they were kind of doing radio on television.
Of course, yeah. I remember like there was a Dutch radio or TV show somebody told me about where they walked everybody in on TV. They watched everybody come in and sit down, and then somebody walked out and they lifted up the arm on a record player and set the little needle down on the record player, and then everybody sat there and sat there with each other and clapped while they listened to the record, and people watched them do that on television.
Totally. And they learned over a very short period of time what the techniques were for really getting the most out of the format, which was video.
Yeah.
And then, there's a clip that you've probably watched it, but if you haven't watched it, and this was early, this was 1952, the I Love Lucy show.
Uh-huh.
There's a clip where Lucy and Ethel are working at the candy factory.
I love that. My son, Johnny, loves that.
He loves that. Yeah. And it's so funny because this is very early in the history of television, and they've completely leaned into the idea of video, right? So they've got on the one side there. So the joke is, for those of you who don't know it, the joke is that Lucy and Ethel are just kind of idiots. I mean, they're the lovable idiots, but so they have this job where the candy is coming down a conveyor belt, and they have to just wrap it and put it back on the conveyor belt. I don't know why this factory is organized this way, but there's a wall between them and the step before them and the step after them.
Yes, that's right.
And they're trying to wrap this candy as fast as they can, and then the belt just speeds up more and more and more. And pretty soon they're doing anything they can, including eating some, putting it in their hat. It's ridiculous. But this is really early in the history of television, and they'd already begun to adapt to really nailing this on video, right? It was really nailing the joke on video.
Yeah. And it's purely a visual joke. You have to be watching it to get it. Yeah.
Yes. It's the facial expressions. It's I read the definition of a clown, right? Is somebody who solves a problem in the stupidest possible way.
Okay, that works.
So Lucy
That's pretty funny.
The problem of the too much candy coming on the conveyor belt in the stupidest possible way, such as trying to eat it. I mean, like as if that's any faster than
in their shirt, put it in their hat. Yeah, so funny.
Take it off just knock it on the floor if you're going to do it. Yeah. Anyway, but that's the nature of new media, right?
Yeah.
Step one is adopt the old thing into the new thing, and step two is start again.
Yeah.
Start again. So I think what we're seeing now as the pandemic sort of wanes, thank the Lord, is that we no longer are going to need for very long the ability to use the internet just to see the shows that we want to see, like concerts and musicals and things like that.
That are in our own backyard. Right.
Right. Yeah. That substitute phase is passing. And where we're going now is people are already, and I talk to them every day, are already moving toward, okay, what could I do with this? Like, what can I do with this? Where I can invite an audience from all over the world into any room that I want and put on a show for them,
Yeah.
So we're just at the beginning.
Well, it's pretty exciting, and people can see that at stellartickets.com.
Yep.
Watch the kind of the front end of that happening.
Yep.
Well, so Jim, I met you through our common beloved connection, RB Hackenberg, who's definitely a mentor, I think, to both of us. He was, I hired him as my boss when I had bigwords.com, and it was the best thing I ever did. And he brought us together, and then I ended up coming to work for you.
That's right.
And I was the first employee at goldstar.com. And I remember sitting in the that room with the other three of you founders and making calls all day. And one of the big things that I remember was how surprising it was to me, the difference between how you all operated and every other .com I'd ever been at. Every place else that I'd been, it was like, work 16 hours a day, work, more, right? And when I came to work with you guys, it was like, look, we're going to show up on time. We're going to work all day, turn the crank really hard, really fast. And then at 5:30, we're all going to go home. You go home too, right?
I don't think it was 5 or 5:30 most of the time, but it wasn't 8 p.m. I will say that.
Yeah. Maybe it was 6, whatever. I mean, and as the company did better and got bigger, you had that attitude, and every other company I worked for burned out, flamed out, didn't make it. Goldstar is still trucking, and the pandemic certainly was a dent, but Goldstar's still around, and Stellar's happening. So, I think that was one of the really big aha moments for me as a leader, was that, that kind of an approach. Just work really hard while you're here, do a really good job, put in a full day,
right?
But go home and have some home time.
Right.
And I think there's something about sustainability, right?
Well, I mean, the question really is, what can you do in the 11th and 12th hour of your workday anyway, right? Like, I don't think that many people are very efficient with their time to begin with. And I think if you think you're going to be there forever, there's really no incentive to be efficient with your time, because you're just burning it up anyway, right? So if you think you spend maybe 9.5, 10 hours maybe at a place, or 9, let's say, you need to get a lot done. I mean, there are studies that have been done on the effect of a 4-day work week, for example, on productivity, and people just find a way to do things in less time. It's kind of remarkable. I hope that the era of showing your commitment, and I'm doing air quotes for people who, are listening to this.
Yeah.
By just being there all the time. I mean, that's just not a great, who wants that, right? I mean, I'm hoping that the millennials and Gen Z kind of wipe that one out for us in the culture, because it's dumb. Dumb.
It is dumb. And I've read studies, Jim, that showed that after working about 38 or 40 hours a week, most people spent most of the time after 40 hours a week fixing problems they created because they worked more than 40 hours a week. That's highly inefficient.
That's a misery maker, right? I mean, that's literally a way to make people miserable. I mean, I think people can be productive for 50 hours a week, no problem. You know what I mean? If they're focused and ambitious and that kind of thing. Yep. I think it's it's sort of I don't know. It's one of these death traps of modern society, where if you're between a commute and an 11-hour day, 6 days a week or something like that, why are you doing this? I mean, like, unless you're. Sometimes I think about Elon Musk and the things that he's taking on. Yep. And he's a crazy, workaholic guy. And he asks for the same thing. But I mean, I would say that's because he's working on things that he really feels like if we don't do them, the whole species is in peril. So I'll give you that. I'll give you that.
Right? Yeah.
There, you have to balance the fact that you're not efficient anymore after a certain point. But if you only have, if there's a ticking clock, you kind of find a way to push through. And so I get that. Most people are not doing that kind of work, in any way. And even people who sort of act as though their work is important, when you really get down to it, it's only important because someone's paying a lot for it. It's not actually important. Most of the things that people do in the world of finance, for example, aren't actually important. They're only important because there's a lot of money at stake.
Right. But we're bringing liquidity to the market, Jim.
Yeah, that's fine. And you can definitely do that in fewer hours a week, Yeah,
that's right.
Push it a little more. You might make, quite a bit more money. So there's that. But, I hope that to some degree the pandemic has helped shift people's values a little bit. When it comes to
me too.
Yeah, I hope so. We'll see.
Yeah. So what are some of the big leadership lessons that you've learned in your life, Jim? What stories come to mind when I ask you about that? I think the biggest leadership challenge of my life has been the reaction to the pandemic shutting down our business. Live entertainment business, huh? Yeah. Back in March of 2020, the whole industry that we're part of came to a halt over the course of about 36 hours. You told me the story of the timeline. Tell me that story again.
Well, it's, it was, we should have seen it coming, and to some degree we did, but, when you're tied to the train tracks, it doesn't matter how much warning you have of the train coming.
Right. Because you're tied to the train tracks.
To the train tracks. And so we were watching this closely since January, and we started to collect the numbers every day of how many people were concerned about the coronavirus and asking can I get a refund on my tickets, or is the show going to happen, or what happens if there's this? And so we started collecting that, it may have been late January or early February. I don't remember. And for a long time, the answer was there was just not much, really, very, very little. You'd be surprised at how late it was before people started being concerned about it.
Yeah. It's interesting.
It is interesting. I think even by the very beginning of March, we were still seeing just a little tiny amount of concern from ticket buyers about anything, right? Like it was just like a handful a day of people. Will I get my, is my event going to be canceled? And so that, I think, alone is a whole. There's got to be a whole psychology study done on that, right? Even though we had all the information in the world about China and other places too that were in the grip of it, it just seemed like we're like, nah. Well, for some mysterious reason, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, right.
But anyway, so. Over the course of there were a couple of weeks, and we started to see. Then it started to really kick in. We saw demand for things start to drop off a bit, and then everything. It was more subtle for a while, and then everything got canceled. Over the course of that week. You remember the week?
I remember South by Southwest canceling.
Yeah,
the event South by Southwest, and that was that was the moment that I was like, yeah, okay, people got the message. Like this is, and that's when I started getting all these calls of like, John, we're canceling our event. And,
Yeah. So, that was the week of, I think it was March 9th. By the end of that week, everything was canceled.
Yeah. It's pretty, it did happen fast when it happened.
Yeah, it did. It's just breathtaking. I mean, so it's like you're driving along at 100 miles per hour and you hit a wall.
Yeah, barn.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, totally.
And so, it was quite obvious to me, and I said it many times, many ways at the time, that there was no quick out for this.
I mean, I remember people talking like June was the horizon, right? File the PPP, keep those people on board, and we'll be out of this by June. Oh,
And my question then was like, how? What would it take for this to be over by June? And I couldn't summon anything in my mind short of just miraculous,
wishing we could wish really hard.
Yeah, I mean, if that worked, then maybe. But I couldn't put any combination of actual events that could occur together to make it not last at least until fall. And even then, that's really optimistic to me.
That was very optimistic. And I think we were all hoping for that, but it was very optimistic.
I'm not even sure what we were counting on. I think we were kind of counting on maybe it'll sort of run its course, or it'll mutate, or there'll be some interventions that bring it into control. And we of course, completely screwed that up beyond our recognition as a country. And as a world, with rare exceptions. With rare exceptions. Yeah. Good thing that it wasn't more dangerous, because otherwise we might not be here. Anyway, so the challenge there was there's a company full of people. In our case, 120 people. Who all of a sudden you go to zero revenue overnight.
Yeah.
And so that part was, I mean, it was gut wrenching. It was just gut wrenching. I mean, it's not just, I don't I stood apart from that. I very much was in the mix of the people who, you know what I mean? Like I also, depend on the company for my livelihood and so forth. And so trying to chart a path through keeping people employed as much as possible, keeping people on health insurance as much as possible, but surviving. I mean, really, things like this come along and they strip away multiple layers of wants and come down to some of the more essential ones, because all of a sudden you're like, well, looks like we'll be out of business in a couple of months. You know what I mean? If we do something quite radical. So we did, and we were fortunate in that, I mean, this is unfortunate, but we'd been anticipating the changes in terms of staffing for a little while, because that was what with our little bit of warning, that's what we were like, well, we're going to have, if this happens, we're going to need to move in this way. And so that was mercifully not that big. Everybody was affected by either a partial furlough or a pay cut. So every single person was affected by that. And from pay period to pay period, we were adjusting mostly down for the long time, mostly down. Like, we need to cut here and cut here, and it kept everybody on the health insurance if they were still part of the company. And so that, tactically, it was a very, very much of a, very, very close work at looking at the numbers and being realistic about the numbers, and anticipating the different things that could play out beyond our control. And that was one side of it. So this is the face everything and rise versus, forget everything and run thing, right? Right? It was just like, okay, every ugly thing there is, we just have to look at it as square in the face as we can. And I got to tell you, I hate it. I hate doing that. I think we all hate doing that. But it's like, well, that or this clock will run down pretty darn fast, right? I mean, that's one thing. But from the leadership, so that's part of leadership, right? Is that you're kind of in charge of facing the ugly facts.
Absolutely, yes.
And no one can do that, really, but the leaders of an organization. And if you don't, you're not doing your job.
And Jim, it brings up a thing that I was talking about a lot at the time, all throughout the really deep parts of the pandemic, is the Stockdale paradox. Stockdale's quote, "You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be." And like you said, like we all hate that, right?
Yeah, no one wants to do that.
But so that's James Stockdale, who lived through one of the most notorious prison camps in the Vietnam War. And when they asked him, why did you live and some people died? Who was it that died? He said, oh, that's easy. It was the optimists who died. And I was like, that sucks. I'm an optimist. But what he really meant was what I just said. You've got to be willing to confront the facts of your reality.
Yeah. Yeah, I've turned to Stockdale multiple times during the pandemic, even though our situation is a lot less dire than his was. I mean,
Of course.
I said that to people, like, may you I've used this in talking to our team, like, may you never face anything like he did, but we can still
Even
borrow
close.
some of that, that wisdom, right? Of saying, like, he talked about guys who would say, "Oh, we'll definitely be out of here by Christmas. They'll for sure we'll get out of here by Christmas."
Yeah.
And then Christmas would come and go, and they would go like, "Oh, well, now I have nothing to sort of hang my hat on." And I think it's I don't even know if I'd count that as optimism. I would count it as just sort of wishful thinkingism.
Yeah. That's it. I think he just said it's the optimists to catch our attention, right?
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right.
It seems people like us who are optimists.
Yeah, exactly.
I will say this though. I think that I would be less likely to describe myself as an optimist now than I used to, because I think that we've had the good fortune. You and I have had the good fortune of growing up most of our lives. Well, or maybe not most. Maybe it's still not most. Who knows? But all of our lives so far, a long time, in an incredibly, incredibly stable and unchallenging world for us.
Yeah, that's true.
And just about any American, regardless of their, economic status or even people who face more systemic discrimination than you and I do, relatively still unchallenging environment compared to the things people have been through throughout history. And so you get thinking that's the norm, but it is not the norm,
Right.
And, from a leader's point of view, you could realize that you're 50 years old and maybe have never faced a tenth of what, some 19-year-old sergeant leading a platoon in World War I faced in the course of a year.
So, dude, for sure.
In terms of facing grim reality.
One of the things I love about growing up with my dad is that he had been in Vietnam in combat and had, some really tough experiences. Nothing like Stockdale even, right? But he was wounded and was in the, deep stuff. And, the stories that he was willing to share with me certainly made me just amazingly grateful for, my life.
Yeah. And and it's not just war. I mean, take your average 10th century peasant anywhere you like, just roll the dice. Their life is full of all kinds of things. So that's part of it. The other part of it, I think, is the communication side of it. So one part is the, I guess, analysis and decision making and facing everything, the most brutal elements of your situation.
Yeah.
The other part of it is communicating. And if you're a leader and you're in that kind of situation and you have to communicate, you have to be direct about it. Like you can, you say, "Hey, we are going to overcome this, but here's the deal." I just think it's a time. The harder the situation, I don't think there's ever a time for pretending or whatever, but the harder the situation, sort of the more important it is to say, "Okay, here's the real situation."
Well, and I think the other thing is the more dire, Well, and the more dire the situation, the more the temptation is to pretend. I think that's where that comes from. I
think that's true. I think that people will experience a greater cognitive dissonance if they pretend during that, though.
Oh yeah, I don't think I think it's harder to pull off because like your face is giving you away, right?
Well, and I also think this is the path to. I mean, for me, it wasn't even like a courageous choice.
It's just the only choice.
It's the only choice because I knew that like it was the beginning of the end of my credibility, and it probably would destroy me too. To say a bunch of stuff that just doesn't. It's not true, and it's not credible, and it's this sort of namby-pamby, happy talk, and then you're just like, well, I'm full of shit, and people probably, if they don't know it now, they will because I've just written some checks with my mouth that my ass can't cash or whatever, right? And then the other thing of like the events are going to I'm going to have to keep patching this lie a million more times, and it ultimately is an overwhelming thing. So it's not something you can really live with. So it's like the earlier you just go, okay, I'm checking into, Heartbreak Hotel like early.
I wish the CDC and the WHO would have done a much better job of that. I think that we saw I can't believe the failed response of the entire planet with very few exceptions. And I think part of it was that, right? Like it was very clear it was airborne, and we just barely got guidance that wearing masks works now that we can take them off because most people are not most, but people are getting vaccinated.
Right.
Like, what was that about? Right. They were afraid of a run on PPE. Well, okay, that's not a good excuse to lie. Right. Tell us the truth and say, here's what you can do. Please don't do a run on PPE because it's just going to hurt you in the end. And, fold up your shirt 4 times and do your best, Yeah,
I think that actually is a good leadership lesson too. There's no question that what they were trying to do was outsmart the dummies, which is a revelatory thing about their mindset, right?
Yeah,
everyone's dumb. They're all going to do the wrong thing. It'd be like them saying, don't wear seatbelts because they don't want people who are all idiots in their view to drive more dangerously because they're wearing a seatbelt, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's just outthinking the room, and
it's
not
disappointing.
Crux of leadership is kind of saying, look, I'm going to level with you. I'm going to talk to you like adults. Yes. And now, of course, there's no question that whatever the CDC says, somebody's going to go, oh, how can you possibly run? You can't decide to say the wrong thing because some of the worst people are going to react poorly to it. You know what I mean?
Totally.
You just can't. I mean, we're still living to some degree with that.
Yeah. Oh, totally. We are. We're going to live with that for the rest of our lives to some degree.
Yeah.
Those institutions have really seriously undermined their own credibility. And like you said, this one, we were lucky it was as mild and benign as it was.
Yes. Well, that's actually, So it's, so I think that is a leadership thing, right? Like talk to people, treat them as adults or treat them as, obviously not everybody needs to know everything all the time when you're a leader. But I think this whole thing of like, I know what I'll do. I'm so clever that I'm going to just do this message. I'm going to bend it this way over here because if I don't, they'll do this and this and this. It's like, it's just, it doesn't usually work like that, right?
It doesn't.
It's really funny. Like a few years ago, there was a pretty severe. I know we're in a drought now in California, but we got plenty of water sort of on tap. So Californians, don't worry, we have lots of water. At least we have several years of water, but we need the rain for sure. But years ago, there was a pretty serious drought, and we didn't have all that water. So California went to a lot of trouble of doing the public service announcements and everything, saying, "Hey, save water, dummies! We're out of water. Like seriously, And guess what? People saved water.
Isn't it amazing? Yeah.
It was like the conservation efforts were really significant, right? I mean, it was, people were like, all right, and they did it a bit, and it made all the difference in the world as the years went on. But, it doesn't mean it always works that way. But, it's like if you want to lead somebody, you got to tell them where to go.
Yeah.
Leadership is not a trick in that way.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It reminds me of a post I saw on Twitter from my friend Fiona Murden. And she said, one of those polls, do you think people are basically good or basically bad? Right. And I replied to that. And I said, by the way, this is a mirror of, who you are.
Right.
And how you answer that question is a look inside how you actually are.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think that, that's one of the things about leadership is, I think it takes some real effort and personal growth and development and honesty with oneself to get to a point where you can be a really great leader in all these challenging situations and still be straight with people and trust people because you trust yourself.
Maybe, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's partly just doing the job as it's required, right? I mean, nobody spends a lot of time thinking about what the inner life of the plumber has to be in order to do good plumbing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, good point. So the inner life of the leader, just do good leaders.
There's things that are objectively going to be generally positive as a leader, and others that are going to be generally defective. Like, generally lying is going to get you bad results. I mean, it may get short term. Generally not being aware of the facts as they exist is going to get you bad results. Generally, mistreating people or being like really emotional all the time in ways that are not positive or are not going to get you good results. Just that kind of thing, right? Where there's just it's more like just a trade or a craft or something. I mean, to some degree. Now,
that's a good point. Yeah,
it may be hard to do that sometimes because stuff gets in the way, but it isn't really. I mean, I think sometimes when people think of the word leadership, they put it up up here. And for those of you listening, my hand is above my head. They put it up here as though it's something that's the accumulation of like your whole being and so some superior thing. But really, it's just trying not to crash the ship. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Trying not to crash the ship. Like I think about the old sailing ships, right?
Uh-huh.
The captain had a job. It wasn't like the captain was the awesomest guy on the ship, so we let him wear the cool hat, right? That wasn't the captain had a job, which is where are we going?
Yeah.
And how shall we get there, right?
Yeah.
And other people, there was 60, 70 other people on the ship, each of whom had a job, and they relied on the captain to tell them that we're doing this, and they're like, hey, well, if that's what we're doing, I can make my part happen because I have my expertise too, right? And that's in a way that's just another part in the machine of like how to get a ship full of goods from one port to another so you can sell it. Whatever you're doing.
You're making me think of how much I like craft beer. And I think that what you're pointing to is just the idea of craft leadership. It's a craft. Just look at if you swing the hammer right and you hit it right on the nail goes in and it's done, and there's a craft to that. That's not some big mysterious thing.
Yes. Well, I think there's lots of different ways people can bring their own being to that, right? Just as a craftsman can, but it is some kind of, it isn't, I mean, it's important, but it's not, maybe qualitatively different from any other craft, And honestly, a lot of it is that a lot of the reason that people mystify leadership is because generally speaking, leadership comes with a certain amount of perks and privileges.
Mm-hmm.
And so, people who have power and perks and privileges, they tend to kind of, they tend to kind of get attention for all those reasons. Right.
Yeah.
And so you go, well, I want that too. So the person who's there says, yeah, well, I know you do, but this is just something special. Oh my God. You just don't know how hard this is. Woo, boy. How do you do it? I can't even explain it. I mean, like, can't you though? You know what I mean? Like that, to some degree you can, right? I mean, that's the thing.
It's not as mysterious as the professionals make it.
Yeah. I mean, there's certainly, like any craft, there's something to learn.
Yeah.
There's something to learn.
Yeah.
And some people are going to be naturally better at it than others, and some people are going to be naturally interested in it than others. I mean, there are definitely moments where if you are a leader who has the responsibility to lead people, where you're like, oh, this sucks.
Yeah.
Don't know why I wanted this job, but other times it's great, right? And other times you're like, oh, I mean, and the real way to look at it is like, this is what I'm trained for.
Yeah.
Right? Like the grittiest sort of darkest moments. You're like, this is what, this is what the preparation was for.
Yes.
I mean, like when everything's flying, it's fun, of course.
Yeah.
But anybody could do it. Anybody could
exactly.
do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, okay, this is why we did this. This is why, we went to business school, or why we took the job overseeing the first little team that you ever ran, or the first little company that you ever built, or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Is so that you are ready when the time comes,
Well, so speaking of that, I know that we're coming up on time for us to go, but is there a leadership experience, a story, a person, whatever that stands out for you as you look back over the road to getting to where you are right now?
I mean, we'll put aside what's happened to me in the last year, although I have to say, like, it's by far the most, here I am sailing along thinking, you know what? I think the hardest part of my career is behind me. Oh, really?
Guess what? Pandemic. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. That's
no, but
there you go.
Not to focus on me. I think that one of the most undertold stories of leadership at this point, for some reason, is Herb Kelleher, who was one of the founders of Southwest.
Love Herb Kelleher.
Yes. But you don't hear people talk too much about Herb Kelleher anymore.
No.
It's interesting. And he, his leadership of that company definitely affected me. I mean, I never worked for him. But in the 90s, he was one of the people that was really held up as one of the greats of not just success, but also in terms of like, how do you learn to be a leader? You know what I mean? And I don't think I really don't think I'm the leader that he was, but he had this real straightforward thing where he looked after the interests of his team first and foremost, right?
Yep.
His whole job was to communicate what they were trying to do in the most direct way that he could, and then to have the organization back that up by simplifying what they did as much as they could, so that it was all focused on the mission that they were trying to do. I mean, he was just a guy who, he notoriously, they were sued by some company. Do you know the story? They were sued.
Tell me.
They were sued by. I don't even know what the issue was. They were sued by some company over something, right? And it wasn't a huge issue. It was a big issue. And so Herb Kelleher challenged the CEO of the other company, and this is when Herb was like 60, right? So it wasn't like a macho man kind of thing. Challenged the other CEO to an arm wrestling match to decide the issue. Yeah, and they did it. So Herb Kelleher and this other CEO brought their employees to this thing, and the two of them actually did arm wrestle. And in the end, they just made some agreement that kind of worked for both parties. But it's just the kind of thing where, like, if you show that as an example to your team, you're just kind of giving them a whole other dimension to work on. Obviously, that's not a great general purpose resolution strategy for things, but just the idea that, like, we can just figure, it doesn't have to be this, either or. It's not always zero sum, right? There's lots of ways to come at things. Yeah. And the other thing I'm trying to do more, John, and it's been in the midst of the pandemic, this has come up. It's like we were talking about this recently. Is to embody fun more, not just for other people, but for myself, right? Like there's just no. I mean, again, like if you haven't been, if you've been lucky enough to where your business is not in the life and death business over the last year during all this, then there's a certain amount where it's like we should, let's have as much fun as we can. I mean, like people. I mean, if you ask people, do you want to have fun at work or not? You know what I mean? And
that's a good hiring question, because if they say no, probably you shouldn't hire them.
Well, then you wouldn't have any accountants. But that's
that's funny. Well, and that
definitely don't, because that only leads to trouble when accountants are having fun. But that's an exaggeration. I mean, like, why not, right? Like it's just most people are not doing work, including me, that's a matter of life or death. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's very Kelleher, right?
And he definitely seemed like he was having fun, and that went on to his employees, and that went on to me as a client of Southwest Airlines. Yeah. I love Southwest, because it's just very personal. It's fun. It's human. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, it worked. It's worked better than, the people don't even know how successful Southwest Air is. I don't.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, Southwest Air is, I don't know where it is today, but for most of the last 25 years or so, Southwest Air has been worth more in terms of market cap than all the other major airlines combined. I mean, just
it's spectacular.
It's just unbelievable. And it's and they don't have the great big jets, and they don't fly to Paris, and they don't do, all that stuff. But what they do is deliver on the value proposition day in and day out. So, so I think people should. Many books were written about him and by him, I think, but if you're looking for a leadership story, I think probably younger people who have kind of grown up in their careers after he was talked about as much as he was in the 90s, let's say.
Yeah.
May not know as much about him. So go pick up any of his books, any of the books about him or buy him. I think he wrote some.
Yeah. Herb Kelleher, the CEO of Southwest Airlines. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, Jim, we're not quite out the other side of this whole pandemic thing yet, but I do really wish you and Goldstar and Stellar Tickets all the best. And I have been really trying to focus myself on the silver linings of the pandemic, because certainly the downsides are obvious.
Yeah.
And I think that Stellar Tickets is a big silver lining. And I think it's very exciting to see and think about where you all will be in 3 years, 5 years. What's this going to look like? Very, very exciting.
The way I look at it is the live entertainment, that COVID has created a huge opportunity for the live entertainment, the world of live entertainment creators.
Yeah.
But we paid a pretty steep price for it. So if those live entertainment people out there, don't let it go to waste. We paid the price.
Yeah, it's already paid. Yeah, you already paid that price.
You paid the price, and so don't let it go to waste. And we didn't pay a price just to go back to where things were. We paid a price to go forward. One of my good friends and speaker at TEDx Broadway, Daniel Watts, did a talk that's on TED.com actually, which has been very cool. But he was talking about Broadway. And the capping line to his talk, which I think applies to more than just Broadway, was Broadway can't come back. Broadway has to come forward.
Oh, that's great.
So I'm just all about coming forward.
Yeah, well, that's great. I mean, listen, I think I'm going to take that on. I invite everyone who's been listening to us take that on. We can't come back. We've got to come forward.
Yep.
I love it. Well, Jim, thank you very, very much for joining me. I hope you'll come back, because I think it'd be fun to so much more that I know that we could talk about, and great to kind of take this moment and document the pandemic, because I think when we do get past it, it's going to be really tempting to forget these moments, and I'm glad we captured it.
Absolutely.
All right.
Okay, man. Excellent.
All right. Thanks, Jim. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Thank you for joining the Speak Like a Leader podcast. Go be awesome.